My name is Austin Harris. I'm going to be going over NAS Whidbey Island air traffic control and our Class C airspace. So the topics we're going to be going over is improving airspace knowledge. We're going to ask questions, or if you have any questions, make sure you ask them. Express your concerns if you have any. I'm going to go over some current or future events or hotspots in our airspace. Overall improvements in safety to pilots as well as controller situation awareness as well as feedback. Some information about myself. So born and raised in Miami, Florida. I'm not going to say the joke because it was pre-recorded, so that's already over. I did enlist in 2005 from Miami, Florida. Was there for 18 years and then came up to Washington State. Was there on the John C. Stennis was my first command. That's actually where I got my pilot's license out of PAVCO down in Tacoma Narrows. From there, went to Pensacola for school, came back up to Washington State at NAS Whidbey Island, first command as an air traffic controller. Went all around the country to San Diego, Key West. Now I'm back up here to retire. So excited about that. All right, so air traffic control, Whidbey approach. Some of our stats. So we are open 24/7, 365 days, with the exception of tower closes on major holidays. Comes to about 2,200 square miles. That's not including the warning areas that we have out to the west, as well as some other airspace that we have on the other side of the Cascades. We have over 100,000 operations annually. That includes GA traffic, commercial, as well as our military aircraft. So we serve 6 airports that have IFR approaches. Something that's new is I have the 6 heliports with IFR approaches. So all the hospitals from, what's one? We got Coopville, we have one in Anacortes, over by Port Townsend, one by Bellingham. All those hospitals that have a heliport actually have instrument approaches to them. The reason I bring this up is because those approaches are actually really, really low compared to what you normally see for IFR traffic. One approach is at, I believe, the lowest was 1,700 feet, and that's for the actual route. For our airspace, it goes down to 1,800 feet, but for the majority, we try to keep aircraft at 3,000 feet. So if you're flying around low level thinking, okay, 1,500 feet, I'm fine, there may actually be an IFR helicopter flying around going to one of these heliports. So just be aware of that. 15 additional satellite airports, which I'll get into in a little bit later, and then as well as we border Canada, Seattle Center, which is above us, as well as Seattle Approach down south. We have approximately 70 military controllers and 9 civilian air traffic controllers. We're actually trying to bump those numbers up. Last year, I was talking about how we're really hurting for air traffic controllers. It's like that throughout the entire Navy. Luckily, we got a big influx of controllers, so that's going to help us out when it comes to actually providing services, getting training, and just doing the best we can as air traffic controllers. Some trends. So October to March, we're kind of getting out of this season right now, but normally we have less VFR traffic, more IFR traffic due to poor weather, daylight savings time. We just got out of sunset setting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so a lot of people don't want to fly at night. So as the daylight increases, obviously more operations are also going to increase, and that's with the military side as well. For squadrons, start secure from FCLPs and CCAs earlier. Again, same thing because of the daylight time. And Alert Area 680, which is our alert area down south by Coopville, normally isn't as active, but it still is active, throughout the winter time. We have increased small craft advisories, high winds. It's that time of year. So as we hit April through September, our traffic actually increases a lot. From GA traffic, commercial traffic, military traffic, everything almost doubles. And that's the majority of our traffic is April to September timeframe. Same thing, Coopville is more active. A lot of times they're more active later in the day because they have more daylight. They have to wait till it gets dark before they actually start doing operations down there. So usually, after 9 o'clock, it's not uncommon to have the alert area active.
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
Right over my house.
Yeah.
Mine too.
Sorry, not sorry. Airspace and frequencies. So our airspace is, I'm going to have the picture later on. Surface to 9,000 feet. We have 2 sectors. We have east and west, which I'll break it down here in a second, as well as arrival, which is actually within 12 miles of the airport, and that's surface to 4,000 feet. So the reason I bring this up is, depending on where you are, you're probably going to be talking to a different controller. But again, especially when it comes to this time of year, just don't get annoyed if we say, hey, contact this person or change this frequency, because that's why. We have 9 radar control positions working at any given time with 1 supervisor. And then on top of that, each position normally would have a trainee because we're always training. So that's why sometimes you hear one controller talking and all of a sudden you hear another controller talk on the same frequencies, because 9 times out of 10, that's the instructor fixing something or saying something that the trainee forgot about or is trying to get the trainee caught up. So don't be surprised if you hear 2 different people talk. And those are just the positions: approach, data, which is the one with coordination, arrival, clearance, final, and the special use airspace, which you'll never talk to them unless you're at 10,000 feet over the Olympics. So, which I don't think anybody in here is going to be doing. All right, so that's just the outline of our airspace. I want to point out over by the Fuka little area, we actually do own into Canada's airspace. Something that people aren't aware of, and I wish I had the picture a little bit further north, is our airspace actually stops just to the west of Friday Harbor and right before Orcas. So when you're north of that, you're actually in Canadian airspace, even though you're still in the U.S. So a lot of people don't realize that. So, and that's specifically for approach. So if you're talking to Bellingham, they're still owned by the U.S., they're still operated by the U.S., just the airspace above it is delegated to Canada. And again, it's just because you have Victoria right there, you have Vancouver right there. If we were to have that airspace, it's just a constant point out approved, because we're not going to talk to them just to turn them to another frequency. So that's why it's set up that way. We do have the...
I have a question.
Yes.
If the tower is closed, if it's a holiday, say, and the tower is closed, the Class C reverts to Class C?
Yeah, it's still going to be a C because approach is open, but the only difference is the airspace below it, meaning the actual surface area, surface to 4,000 feet, is going to be encompassed by approach. So tower is not going to own that airspace.
Okay, so if
you want to
do that Class C, do I need to contact approach to do that? Mm-hmm. I do.
Because again, that goes to checking in with the Class C. The Class C never goes away. The thing with that is when tower is closed, you would still have to contact approach, because what's the stipulation for entering Class C? You have to establish 2-way comms. So if you call tower, they don't answer, who are you going to establish 2-way comms with? It'll automatically be approach. That makes sense. Which I was going to get into, and you beat me to it. So
oh, sorry about that.
You're good. Arlington. Whew. Yeah, Arlington. I got a story about that later. But their airspace is actually owned by Payne sector, so it's 5,000 feet and below. So we do not operate that airspace. I'm very glad we don't operate that airspace. It's interesting down there. But we do own 6,000 above up to 9,000 feet over the Arlington area. And that's how it's kind of depicted. For frequencies, it's just like it is on the chart. So on the left side, you got 118.2, right side is 120.7. And then Payne sector, if you're over by the Arlington area, is 128.5. You can call us when you're in that airspace if you're trying to go north, because we're so used to it. And again, a lot of people come off at Arlington and automatically check into approach. And if you call 128.5, they're going to say contact Whidbey approach on 120.7. So, but for airspace wise, that's the way it's set up. All right, this just goes over 7110 stuff, which is our ATC Bible. Essentially talks about all the services for Class Charlie, essentially saying that we are going to separate IFR from VFR aircraft and provide VFR aircraft with flight following and traffic advisories. That's that in a nutshell. If you want to read it, it'll be posted on the EAA website. Checking in. This is always something interesting because everybody has their own way of checking in, which is completely fine. All I ask is to be brief and to the point. Hey, you, this is me, this is where I am, this is what I want to do. Got it. The only exception to that is if you're trying to do flight following outside of our airspace, like you're going to Tacoma Narrows, you're going to Bremerton or somewhere south, or even over to the other side, Spokane area, just call us up and say that you want to talk, or you want flight following all the way or a handoff. Both of those will work. And what that tells us is we need to put an actual VFR flight plan in the system for you. It's just a different squawk, and the reason or the way you can tell if it's a local squawk, meaning you're not on a code for handoff, is it will start with a 04 or a 01. So if the controller says squawk 0151, or 0452, that's a local code. So you're not going to get handed off to the next sector. Anything outside of that, you will get handed off and get flight following all the way. Any questions on that?
No, but so your preference, and is this facility-wide that you prefer not just, aircraft ID VFR request, but actually
So
what you want?
you can do, and again, it's whatever you're comfortable with, because we do have pilots, Whidbey approach, and a lot of people are taught that way too. You call them, you get a response, and you just wait. So Whidbey approach, Skyhawk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just wait, and then they'll say Skyhawk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Whidbey approach, and then you say your request. That's 100% correct, and I'm not saying that's incorrect. It's just a lot of the controllers, we're different than most facilities in the fact that we're dealing with jets. So we're trying to, and there has been times, I even heard it the other day when I was flying, where the controller is constantly talking. So if they're constantly talking and you're doing, hey, you, this is me, they're going to be like, they're last in the bottom. They're not going to worry about you. The reason I say, if you say, hey, you, this is me, this is where I am, this is where I'm going, now we know, because we glance over on the radar screen and we'll see, okay, that's that guy. Is it going to interfere with what I'm about to do? Skagit's in the position where it's to the northeast side of our airspace. So if you say I'm off of Skagit going to Arlington and we're runway 25, all of our aircraft are coming in this way and descending towards the airport.
Right over my house.
We're over everybody's house. They're even over my house. And I thought where I lived, I was like, I know where the airspace is, and they still do it. But again, if it's going to be an issue, and it's like, you know what, yeah, this aircraft may be an issue, I'm going to need to talk to them to get them going westbound or eastbound or give some type of altitude restriction. So that's why it helps us knowing when you give us that information, even though we may not respond to you, at least we know that's that aircraft going south. Where it becomes an issue, and this is just a side story, I went flying last week when it was super, super windy. I had a flight scheduled and I was going to build up some cross-country time. Didn't happen because it was like this, and it was anticipated to die down later in the day. So I was getting up there, flying around, got my little touch and goes in, which, I thought I was bad. It was just the wind. I'm not that bad, I swear. But it made me realize, like, this is something it's not fun. And I think the winds were only 10 gusts into 16 or something like that. And I was just bouncing around over there, and it was not fun. So diverted my cross-country time to the following week, got up. It was an actual beautiful day, and I was going from Skagit to William R. Fairchild to Arlington, which is why I chuckled when I mentioned Arlington, and then back up to Skagit. So I had my iPad with me, and I was like, I see a target 500 feet below me. I was at 4,500 feet. And I was like, I wonder what it is, because I was getting flight following. Approach didn't tell me anything, but I already have situational awareness, my little knee pad, with my iPad, and it hooked up to ADS-B, so I saw the traffic. I knew it was a matter of time before they called it. I just didn't know the altitude, because again, it's been a while since I've flown. I was like, it looks like about 1,000 feet. No. That aircraft is a P-8 Poseidon, was at 4,000 feet, and I was at 4,500. The controller issued a restriction. I was like, obviously, 'cause I'm from that side, so I knew that was going to happen. But the reason I bring that up is, if you're flying without flight following and you don't have that information, because especially a lot of the older planes don't have, that ADS-B out and in and all this other fancy stuff. So we're there to provide a service at the end of the day. But I would have been freaked out if I saw that, because later on, looking at the course that I was at and that aircraft, they ended up being literally on the same course that I was on. So he went literally right under me at 4,000 feet, and I was at 4,500. It may not look like a lot, but that's still, if I was the opposite side of that, and they were at 4,000, I was at 3,500, there's a little thing called wake turbulence, and I did not want to be a part of that. So that's that. Look how gorgeous that is. I mean, the picture's not the greatest, but.
What were you flying?
Just the 172 out of Cascade, just to get up, stay current, but I mean, I picked the right day for it, that's for sure. All right. From current slide, there we go. So the reason I bring up Arlington before was the fact that even Skagit, When I was flying that day, Skagit got extremely busy right after I left, to the point where the controller was getting frustrated because there were so many aircraft over that airport. And I quote, he said, "It looks like a bee's nest over there," because it was just planes everywhere. So when you're telling us, hey, this is me, this is where I am, this is where I'm trying to go, if we see that, we're like, okay, which one of these 15 airplanes over Skagit is it? But again, it's at least letting us know for situational awareness, we do have an aircraft over there trying to go here. Is it going to interfere with us? It may or may not. So, yep, that's just 7110 stuff. I'm not going to bore you with that. Checking in, again, we already went over that. Just be mindful that our controllers are monitoring different frequencies. Like I mentioned, that we have the east and west side. We have VHF frequencies and UHF frequencies for the military aircraft. So not only, even if we're split where the two sectors are open, where we have west open and east open, they're still working 118.2, the UHF frequency for that, 127.7, the UHF frequency for that. On top of, there may be additional frequencies that they're working on that you're not going to hear because we're talking to jets doing approaches on a different frequency. So my advice that I would give for checking in, especially one of our biggest pet peeves, is if you hear a controller say, Phoenix 1-1, turn left heading 350, wait that 5 seconds like you're responding to that, Phoenix 1-1, turn right heading 350. Then check in. Because we're trying to get that read back, and next thing you know, we hear Skyhawk November 1-2, and then Phoenix is reading back the instruction, which we have to confirm they actually took that instruction because they're going 350 knots, so their mileage is getting eaten up real quick. So just be mindful of that whenever you're talking to the controllers, because although you may not hear response, they actually are responding to different aircraft. So you always want to use your call sign when checking in. I know I've heard sometimes where they're just like Skyhawk and then whatever it is. That doesn't really help us, because when we're working, we have a keyboard, we have the radar scope, we're typing in that call sign, and we also have our assistant that can write down that call sign. But if you just say Skyhawk, it's like, now I got to say Skyhawk calling off of Friday Harbor, say call sign. So now, great to have your type, now I don't have your call sign. You flip that, you say, Whidbey approach, this is November 12345 off of Friday Harbor going to X airport. Okay, well, what's your type? Do we need your type? No, but we care more about your call sign than your type. Your type comes into play where if we need to call traffic, obviously we would like to know what type of aircraft you are. So always use your call sign.
And a lot of us, I'm notorious for, I give the full thing, but then I'm down to 3 kilo mic.
Correct.
And that's okay with you guys?
If you give the full call sign first, yes. And that's one of the debates where there are aircraft that their entire call sign is 407. So it's like, okay, are we going to know that you're really 18407 or just 407? So we're not going to be like, hey, say your full call sign, unless
Everything after the end.
unless there's another one where we have a 18407 and you have a 15407, and we're like, let's make sure this is the actual call sign. So that's where we're really coming to play.
I'm always listening for, you have some common letters with somebody else that's talking to you, and then I start going back to the full thing. So
Yeah, and that's another thing too. We would try, especially if they're similar, because even with the Canadian call signs, which are just letters, it's still, Charlie Foxtrot Hotel Alpha Lima, then Charlie Foxtrot Lima Hotel Alpha. To us, they sound similar. To them, they may not, because we're so used to using numbers. But we still try to say, hey, just be advised we do have a similar sounding call sign. And also make sure you're aware of your call sign. I know it's difficult because a lot of people, if you're not proficient, like I'm so used to it, when I was flying around, I'm just like, as soon as they started with it was 19671 was the call sign, and they were doing 671. As soon as they heard 6, I was like, all right, I'm ready. What do you want me to do? Just because I'm used to it. A lot of pilots aren't, because they don't do fly following, or they only do it if they're trying to go IFR. So it's whatever you're comfortable with. Let me put it like that. Yes.
If you're not transponder equipped, flying on a Skagit, say, what data do you guys see?
So if you're not transponder equipped, we're not going to get any type of altitude readout. You'll just show up as a blue dot on the radar scope, and we'll get your speed because it's based on the actual radar sweep, so you're just considered a primary target, which is just that raw radar, hey, there's an aircraft here. The issue with that is it's hard to call traffic because we don't know what altitude you're at. We had and even for the ADS-B aircraft, they don't know what altitude you're at. We had a commercial aircraft off of Bellingham going south, non-radar identified target with no transponder. It was right off the departure corridor for Bellingham. He had to turn to avoid that aircraft because he didn't know what altitude. You could be at 500 feet, you could be at 4,500 feet. So it's just a bigger protection bubble that we have to protect for, and we try not to overfly aircraft that aren't having a transponder, because even if it's just giving them a little turn where the target's here and we're going to go like this, because again, we can call traffic, but if you have an aircraft going 350 knots and you're at 4,500 feet and that aircraft's at 4,500 feet, it's a bad day.
Traffic bubble to up and down?
We try, and it's based on controller preference, but it's definitely a lot more traffic calls because we want that aircraft to actually see that aircraft because we don't have any information on them. So it's constantly traffic call, traffic call, traffic call until they report them in sight. We usually don't let them get within 3 to 2 miles before we turn them, just because, again, we rather play it safe and say, okay, they're going south, this guy's going this way, well, let's just bump them, one way or the other, just to make sure they're not going to touch. So.
The second question, so on a holiday, if people aren't aware the tower's closed and they call tower, does approach monitor that tower frequency?
They normally do, but you can also check the ATIS, which is, we do have a VHF frequency, I think it's 134.26, I want to say off the top of my head. But I would just key up the ATIS, because that's going to be broadcasted on the ATIS saying Whidbey Tower is closed, contact Whidbey approach on these frequencies.
So you're just going to hop down to if you want to report town.
Yep. And even if you're, another good practice too, if you're off of Anacortes, if you listen to the ATIS code, which runway we are, that would be beneficial as well, because the issue with Anacortes is the approach corridor for that is, you see Anacortes right there, and runway 14 is right where that line is at, essentially. So if we're 14 landing that way and you're off Anacortes thinking, okay, I'm just going to skirt around that way, are you legal to? Yes. Would you prefer to go the opposite way? 100%. Just because, again, the P8s have ADS-B, they see you out there, this is recorded, they will, they don't like being caught off guard with aircraft. So in a lot of times in that airspace, since Anacortes is there, they would be in a process of switching, because 9 times out of 10, as soon as they're at 10 miles, they're going to be already with tower, and all of a sudden the aircraft pops up off Anacortes. They're like, oh, they didn't call traffic. It's like, well, there wasn't anything there at the time. So it's just practice, and again, calling us, getting flight following, even if it's the tower, saying, hey, we just want to transition east or west of the airport. You got me off because this is later on again. I'm going to go over it. So, yeah.
Do you handle experimental any differently than certified for GA?
No. The only difference is instead of putting in, C172 for the type, it's just EXP.
Because I've been flying around the area, not talking to you guys, but kind of underneath the Class C, and heard another RV called experimental and told stay clear of the Class C, and then almost immediately the Cessna 172 popped up and got a clearance to go through. And it was
yeah.
I wonder if you're dealing with us lot who are kind of,
Again, it depends on where you're going, what altitude you're at. Are you going to be a factor?
Okay.
So if that aircraft wasn't a factor, like let's say they're saying, okay, I'm at, because this happens a lot, Jefferson County going to Friday Harbor.
Sure.
And they're like, hey, we want to fly following. We're like, yep, we're too busy. They'll say, remain outside of Class Charlie, but now we have that same aircraft or a different aircraft going from Jefferson County to, let's say, Anacortes or here, Skagit.
Yeah.
That's going to be more of an impact to our operations, so we want to make sure we talk to that aircraft.
So another question, doing a scenic ride out around from, say, Whiskey 10 out to Mount Olympus and just doing a round robin and then back, Do you want people to talk to you, or would you prefer not to?
Again, it's preference. So if you're going to be low level, let's say 1,000 feet,
Oh, no. I mean, this would be climbing to 10,000 feet.
initially, if you're at 1,000 feet and you're like, I'm going to go up along the shoreline, and I want to start climbing when I get by, I don't know, like Anacortes or Port Towns or something like that. The biggest thing is altitude. If you're going to impact the Class Charlie area, the outer ring, definitely call approach. If you're going to stay low level for a while, then just wait and contact tower.
10,000 and then doing a circuit around Mount Olympus and then sort of back to over the park and then sort of descending through the gap there. And
Yeah, if you're going to go that high, I would it's so weird because our aircraft come from everywhere. I mean, east, west, north, south. We have aircraft going up to Canada. So if you would feel more comfortable, because again, we're here to provide a service. So if you want flight following from us and you're like, hey, I'm going to go do this tour, I'd rather you call us to get that. And if we say no, then obviously you shouldn't be an impact.
Anyway, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's just pilot preference on if you want to do that or not. But just be mindful, if you're trying to get flight following all the way, we stop at 9,000 feet. So if you're going to get flight following with center, that's where the issue is.
Are your controllers at Whidbey knowledgeable of the various myriad of different experimental planes? If you had Sonics 601 Sierra Alpha, would you know what a Sonics was, or would you prefer just to be called experimental?
Experimental.
Okay.
Just because you have the controllers that have been there for 20 plus years that have seen, and they just know everything.
They've seen everything.
Then you have controllers that are first-time tours or second-time tours, and they just know an airplane has wings and it flies. So, you have those two different ones, and you have people that are really into aviation that know and track all these different types of aircraft, and then you have ones that just know because they've heard it before. So again, I would just go with experimental, and if they ask you what type, then give them that information. So just like I know RVs always say RV7, RV10,
that's basically illegal because you're required to say experimental. But a lot of RVs, it becomes the norm now that
because even then you have controllers ask you like what type of RV.
Yeah, right.
Like, okay, you're RV7. Okay, so.
Yeah.
So frequencies for your military aircraft, the Growlers and the P-8s, are they VHF and UHF, or are we going to hear them on AT2 and 120.7?
The P-8s you'd hear every now and then, but again, just like you have different controllers, you have different pilots as well. Some of them like using UHF, some of them like using VHF. So every so often you will hear them. Like the P-8 example I gave earlier was not on VHF, because when they call traffic, I didn't hear the response to it. But also, I was on a different frequency because they could have been on 118.2 and I was on 120.7. So, or they.
Growlers UHF only?
No, they have VHF. They're capable of doing it. They prefer not to. I'm not an EA-18 pilot, but from what I understand is in order for them to use VHF, they have like a separate radio, like off to the side they have to use. So they try to avoid that because obviously you're diverting your attention to somewhere else that's not right out there. And all their frequencies are normally channelized where they just push a button more so than have to actually dial in each digit. So it's quicker, more expeditious to say, contact Seattle Center button 8 and they're gone versus, all right, I gotta put that one in. Like a normal pilot, they're just push a button and they just keep going. So
just to be clear, when I do my check-in, I don't need to give an altitude. That's not helpful.
You don't have to. You should. But again, it's weird. I like hearing an altitude because if you say, and it has happened before where we had aircraft call it for flight following and they're at 8,500 feet and they're just not calling us. I'm like, well, I'm not going to talk to you for 500 feet because you're clicking up, especially if it's like a jet. They'll be out of my airspace before I even give them a squawk. So I don't think any jet pilots in here? No? Okay, so you all be fine just saying, hey, you, this is me, this is where I am, this is where I'm going. So. Yes, sir.
If it's a busy time of the year and I'm going flight following to Spokane and I'm over Bayview, am I increasing my odds of not getting dropped if I let you know ahead of time that I'm requesting flight following in the first call up?
If you request flight following when you first call up, right off of Skagit, not when you're 5,000 climbing, we have more time to work that information in the system, but also because it's busy for us, that means Seattle Center is probably going to be busy too. So the odds of them taking that handoff, again, every facility is different, every controller is different. You may get handed off, but it also depends on what's going on at that time. Is the controller going to be able to accommodate for it? Unfortunately, that's the way it is because it's always going to be IFR over VFR. So if it's a clear 100 day, but it's also in the middle of the week, let's say our normal rush hour is like 1 p.m. to 5, you may not get it. But if it's first thing in the morning on a Saturday and nothing's going on, you have a higher chance of getting it. But again, it's worth calling just to try than not calling if you really want it.
And call early and call at a lower altitude.
Yep. Below 5,000. Yep. Yes, sir.
Just curious, we had a really unusual situation happen last year. A friend of mine had a sailboat that was anchored off of the coast of Anacortes and had broken loose. And it was drifting somewhere up here. And he asked me to fly around and see if we could find it from the air. We called Whidbey.
Approach or tower?
Approach.
Okay.
And we told them what our situation was, asked if we could fly along the coast 1,000 feet looking for a sailboat, and they said no. Just flat out.
When was it during the day?
Something we should have done. It was during the day.
Was it during the week or was it on the weekend?
I don't remember.
See, these are all the questions that, because again, if it's during the week, we're really busy, the odds of you getting into the surface area are going to be lower. Just because if we have a full pattern, normally for us, if we have 3 P8s in the pattern, plus we have a whole bunch of F-18s inbound, we're not going to approve any transitions in the tower, just because there's really no place for you to go. Because P8s, if you have 3 of them, you're going to have 1 3 miles upwind, 1 in the downwind, 1 3 miles downwind turning on top of the F-18 traffic we're trying to work in. And a lot of times they do a butterfly pattern where you're having P8s on one side, F-18s on another side. So where are you going to fit into this mix?
So there's no way that we could.
It depends.
Fly outside the lower layer.
Yeah.
And stay at less than 1,300 feet.
Yeah, if you stay outside of that airspace at below 1,300 and you're like, well, that may be it over there, just call up. The biggest thing is communication. So if you call up tower and say, hey, I'd like to transition your surface area. We're trying to find a sailboat. I think I see it. It looks like it's, off my 3 o'clock or whatever it is. And they say remain outside the airspace. All right, Whidbey Tower, when do we have an ETA where I can investigate this? Because again, we don't know. All we know is you're trying to get clearance through the airspace. We don't know what you're trying to accomplish. Just like if you're trying to do a tour over Deception Pass, just say, hey, I would like to do tour over Deception Pass and do a couple of loops and then depart. But if you just say, hey, I would like a west shoreline through Deception Pass to Skagit, as soon as you start making that first turn, the control's going to ask you to say intentions. Because they don't know what you're doing.
So you approve somebody doing a loop over Deception Pass or something?
not a.
You gotta start under.
Yeah, not this loop, but just a turn. So
Looking for a friend.
all I'm saying is we can't see you over Deception Pass. So what you do over there is at your own risk. So
how accurate is that radar as to your position on the ground? When I was coming back last time from down south, I came in below the McCord, and there's an artillery range down there. And according to my GPS in the airplane, I cleared it, and I started to turn a little bit north. And I got a call from the ground. They says, turn back the other way right now. So, and I told them, I said, my GPS showed me I'm clear.
I'm going to say our radar is way more accurate than your GPS. Just because the fact that it uses 2 different systems, because you have the raw radar feed, which is just the primary, I see you, this is how long it takes back, or it comes back to the radar, that's how far away they are. A GPS, which you're using, satellite-based stuff, how many GPS signals are you getting? Are you getting 3, you're getting 7, are you getting 14? So that also errs on the accuracy side of it versus an actual raw radar feed saying something is here. It's never going to be, oh yeah, well actually over here, it's not going to do that. On top of that, when it uses the transponder interrogator, when you're using your mode 3, that's a secondary. So it's like, okay, I got a primary here, I'm getting a secondary at the same spot, that's the same target, that's where you are. So I'm always cautious with GPS, because even having, the ADS-B now, I was the same way, where it's like I'm still using ground references for the airspace. So I know, okay, the Charlie ends about where that, river's at in the slosh area. So as long as I stay to the east of that, I'll be fine. Even though my GPS may say, yep, I'm clear, I would always use my visual reference points and sectional charts over GPS.
Yeah, down there, it's all trees down there.
There has to be something, water tower or something where it's like, okay, as long as I know to go over here. So, any other?
If you tell us to stay clear of your space, do you want us to acknowledge that or just declutter the frequency?
Roger.
Okay.
As long as we heard you, Roger.
But you want to know that you were heard.
Yep, because the biggest thing is the transmission not acknowledged is the transmission not received.
Yep.
So, yes, sir.
All right, 2 points. Are MOA A and B ever active, and what are they for?
Oh, look at there. Restricted area 6701 and the MOAs. So, I'm glad you brought that question up. It's like you did this brief before.
My timing is excellent.
So both are normally not used. However, if the need arises, they will be scheduled by NOTAMs. A lot of times people ask, like, well, restricted areas, we can't fly through it because it's scheduled. Check NOTAMs. Just like you do your weather brief and you check the weather, you should be checking NOTAMs as well. It's always going to be NOTAMed. 2 briefs ago, I had one of the civilian controllers with me over at Skagit at Cascade. We were given a brief. He's like, I've never seen it go active. And he was given a brief 10 years ago, and literally that week it went active. So then we went and did this brief. Same thing. We're like, yep, never goes active. And I kid you not, the next week it went active. So I'm like,
What do they do there?
different things. Normally it's UAS stuff. Oh, you know, TAMmed. Yeah, they do stuff over there. So there's a lot of training that will happen, low-level stuff. Usually it's not with our aircraft because this was established decades ago. They used it for actual runs, but we're not going to... See, I don't like saying we're not going to do something because I'm going to talk it into fruition. So normally they're not active, but they're going to be active via NOTAMs. So check the NOTAMs. It's also usually broadcasted on our ATIS as well that it's active, just like the alert areas is also going to be broadcasted on our ATIS, which is why I say check our ATIS, because then you know where we are, if there's any special ops going on. You have all the information that you're going to ask the controller, is alert area 680 active or the MOA's active? The ATIS is going to have that information on there, or the NOTAMs. Does that answer your question?
If you just ask for the special use airspace...
You're going to get 2 different responses. You're going to have a controller that says, all special use airspace is cold,
Yeah.
or you're going to get a response, they're activated by NOTAM, all special use airspace is cold.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
those are the 2 responses you're going to get. And then you may just get, they're activated by NOTAMs. You should have checked them before you left. But they're cold. So, yeah, it just depends on the mood of the controller that day. So, but they are always going to be NOTAMed active. And on top of that, usually the NOTAM is in at least a week prior to it going active. So it's not going to be something where we need it active like today and all of a sudden you caught off guard. No. As long as you check it even the day before, it's, yeah.
What about when Coopville, the alert area is active? Do you have any preferences or things you'd like us to do or consider?
Well, what are you trying to do?
Fly across the top of it.
FCL, we're transiting to Port Townsend or something.
So the airspace goes up to 3,000 feet. If you're above that, it is what it is. If you're trying to transition through it, you're probably not going to, if you're talking to ATC, you're not going to get that transition because you'd rather protect for it. Coopville's a little unique. Actually, I'll just go like that. Because even though we're protecting that alert area, they're just down there doing touch and goes. But even when they're not down there, so this is, Coopville right here. Once they're out of that airspace, they have different routes they can take. Where if they're, departing south, they'll come out, they'll do this loop and then climb and then go this way. Or they'll come out still going south and they'll loop back going this way. You're still going to end up encountering those jets that are in that airspace because they could be going to or from. So that's why it's based on your comfortability. So if you know it's active, if you stay away from it, you'll be fine. And even when they're coming back, they're going to be at 2,500 feet. So the alert area is at 3,000. So even if you're protecting yourself by going 35, you're never going to encounter aircraft with them.
Only if the cloud base is more than that.
Then you definitely want to call.
Yeah,
So,
I've seen them less than 1,000 feet scooting around under the clouds.
and that's the thing too, where just like you have pilots that, so he's not here today, is he? Jonathan Fay, Zenith guy? Okay. So I was actually working that day when he posted on Facebook that he had to divert to Oak Harbor. It was when it was super snowing out, like the weather just changed. It just started dumping down snow, hailing, doing all this crazy stuff. And he's like, I'm going to Anacortes. He was getting flight following. And I was like, I don't know. Because we get raw radar feeds with weather as well. I'm like, I don't know. This is kind of, I wouldn't do it. But he doesn't see the same thing I see. Or he may see it and just thinking, okay, it's not that bad. But from our traffic, it got to the point where we actually changed runways based on the weather because it was so dense. But he got just west of the air station, was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it, and I need to divert to Oak Harbor. Awesome. And I was actually going to do a little shout out because that's what you should do. Don't try to force something just because of the airspace or just because of the weather. And just let us know, like, hey, I can't make it this way. I need to divert to Oak Harbor. All right, cool.
Put him in a hangar that night. We did.
Oh, look at you guys. So, anything else for the alert area? Yes, sir.
So if you were given flight following to Port Townsend from Bellingham, let's say, go through the airspace, and you hadn't checked the NOTAMs, and Chinook was hot, would they tell you?
Yes.
Okay.
We would always tell you if you're getting flight following, we're never going to put you in a situation, just like with the alert area, if it's active and you're at 2,500 feet, say it be advised the alert area is active. You say, Roger. Again, it's the controllers don't know what type of equipment you have on the aircraft. So, just like the 172s that I fly, they don't have GPS on them. So where is the end of alert area? So if I'm trucking along by Point Wilson, thinking, okay, I'm going to go north towards my house by Penn Cove and then over, there's a little thing called wind. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I'm fine, but you're getting blown into it. They're going to say, hey, I see you encroaching on it, or I need you to turn to this heading, and then they'll actually vector you out the way. So, any other questions on that? No? So that's just what they do at Coopville. So high volume of pilot training, touch and goes, FCLPs, field carrier landing practices, and every so often the H-60 helicopter goes down there and does auto rotations.
Do they have resting cables there at that?
So last time I was here, they did. I don't think they have them down there now.
I think they use them.
Yeah,
They do that.
because if they do take a trap down there, then they can't just take off. They have to literally take the aircraft apart, bring it over on a truck, and then, yeah. So they're not landing there, that's for sure. So all the instrument approaches had to change Oak Harbor because that's no longer Oak Harbor anymore, but yeah.
Who knows what it'll be called?
Yeah. Let's see. All of our satellite airports. The biggest thing is just be mindful, especially with Skagit, because the controllers are aware that I-5 corridor is not only for vehicles, it's for aircraft too. Like that's the biggest transition point we have. Everybody flies long I-5 all day long. The issue arises when we're 2-5, again landing to the west, where if you're below 3,000 feet, you're usually not a factor. Just be mindful that our traffic pattern, we're always going to have aircraft at 3,000 in our airspace. So that's why a lot of times if we get flight following, the controller will say, I need you at a VFR altitude because we're using 3,000 feet. That's like our go-to altitude around the class Charlie. So if we have VFR aircraft at 3,000, that's more workload for us because now we have to call traffic. You're going to be more of a potential issue later on. So to alleviate that, we just say, pick a VFR altitude. We don't care if it's 2,500 or 3,500, as long as we have that 500 feet of separation, because that's required for us to be in the class Charlie. Anacortes we talked about a little bit. call tower up. If you want to transition, you don't have to force yourself to stay low, just call. Because the biggest thing is the controllers are going to be more comfortable if you call and get used to having those calls, then you never call, and all of a sudden the aircraft calls and you have a controller up there that never did a transition before because they never talked to a pilot asking for a transition, and you're like, no. Versus if I'm up there, transition approved. Or unable at this time, I'll still try to work it in, but again, it's just based on the runway configuration. But at least I know what you're trying to do. I can at least give you some tips or say, hey, unable to accommodate due to active runway 14. If able, proceed eastbound and then south. So that way we can...
Do you allow transitions right over the top of the field?
Above 4,000, yes.
Okay. So if you... So you've either got to stay outside of the primary area or ask for a transition along the rim of the primary area.
Mm-hmm. So normally, and that's going to lead into the next slide for things are told and why. So Smith Island, so all the VFR reporting points, which I think is on another slide, we use those a lot for especially Smith Island, which a lot of people aren't familiar with. If you're ever off the coast of Whidbey, some people are, you'll be surprised, it's like, see that submarine looking island? That's Smith Island.
Yeah.
So we use that especially for 25, which is our main runway, and we're getting to that time of year where that's going to be our primary runway. And it just so happens that it's ironic that 90% of the traffic is going north and south, but we're landing east and west. So that's why it's an issue. If everything else is north and south and we're landing north and south, it's not really that big of a deal. But that leads into things you're told and why. So transition west of Smith Island to en route from the Friday Harbor, San Juans. We could use it in Anacortes as well. Again, it's because we're runway 25. We want you west of that airspace. Now, the exception to that is if you can maintain VFR at or above 2,500, then we can usually just have you transition straight up, because we'd rather you be closer to the air station at 2,500, and again, it's weather dependent, which we understand, versus you're saying, hey, I can't do that, I need to be at 1,900 or 1,800 feet, and that's as high as I can go. Now we're going to use Smith Island because we want you further away, because when these aircraft depart, they're going to pop up to 2,000 feet like that. So now, if we're not establishing comms and we can't climb them, we want you further away so we have time to establish comms, get them up climbing over you. If you're at 2,500 and you're right along the shoreline, all right, you're capped at 2,500, this guy's going to be climbing under you, and as soon as he passes, we can get him going. So that's why we tell you that. Like I said, departures initially climb to 2,000, and then we'll get them higher after that. Why do we get asked what side of the island I plan on transitioning? Again, which runway are we using? Are we using 14? Are we using 25? You're using 7? It just depends on, again, what runway we're using. But at least we can plan on, does your plan work with what we're doing? That's the biggest thing. So if there's something going on where we're like, we'd rather have them go to the west, but let me just ask, do you plan on, which side of the island you plan on transitioning? West side? Perfect. Or we'll just say, transition west of Whidbey or east of Whidbey. You have some controls that say 3 miles to the east, which I try not to issue because, again, if you're in 172, no GPS, what's 3 miles east or west of the air station? So I rather give headings and altitudes more so than actual mileage distance.
Some time ago, doing a scenic ride out over Deception Pass, and I asked for clearance into that area, so I was talking to the controller, and suddenly the controller changed, and I got to immediately turn onto this heading, maintain 1,000 feet, and steered me straight towards Smith Island. So I'm heading out towards Smith Island, and I said, unable to accept the clearance because I'm not going out to Smith Island at 1,000 feet on a single engine aeroplane. And so I said, I'm going to turn onto a heading, and it kind of got interesting from that point on.
I think I remember that day.
Do you?
I'm not going to say I wasn't in a tower that day, but I definitely remember that day. Just like I said, there's controllers training. A lot of times things will come up where it was an interesting day. I'm going to put it like that.
There was a lot of F-18 traffic, and there were F-18s coming in over the top. So in the end...
Were you departing VFR and then trying to pick up IFR, or were you just departing VFR?
I was VFR.
Okay.
And the traffic above me, I could hear the other half of the conversation. So I just immediately turned back the direction I was going and hugged the shoreline at 800 feet and carried on around the back of Anacortes.
Yeah, something we used to do back when we had a flying club was we used to do the transitions along shoreline at 500 feet as well.
Right.
A lot of the controllers aren't comfortable with that because they're like, well, they're too low. It's like, well, if they can't accept it, they can't accept it. Right. But again, that's where coordination and then me taking this information back to the controllers like, look, they can do this. Plus, I'm telling you as a pilot, like, I can do it. It's just based on comfortability.
Being at 500 feet of the shoreline,
then a mile and
1,000 feet, not being able to make it the Smith Island or the shoreline.
Yeah, and a lot of times we do get,
an option as far as I'm concerned.
and we do get the aircraft that say we want to stay close, unable to transition due to glide distance, as you'll hear that a lot. Right. And again, it just changes what we have to do. So we're not going to say, well, you can't do it, radar service terminated, frequency change approved, because now it's like, especially weather, if you can't go above 2,000 feet, you're going to go through the Charlie. Yeah. So you're on flight following, you try and get to point B, Anacortes are here. We're just going to have to change what we're doing. But again, anything can be done with coordination and communication. That's the biggest thing. So if you're unable to do something, just say it. You have to come up with another plan. If you're talking to tower and like, hey, we need you to go west immediately, maintain 1,000 feet, usually it's because something was involving that. I've seen it where the aircraft that we're talking to, the military aircraft, just like we have similar sounding call signs, they'll take something that was for a different aircraft. Or we want them to do something, they don't do it because they forgot, and they end up turning too soon, and XYZ. There's 100 different examples, but it's kind of like threading the needle is the phrase we use. And a lot of times it's like, oh, that'll work out perfect, and all of a sudden an aircraft that isn't you does something that we're not expecting. It's like, well, rather than trying to rework that situation because that's going to be a conflict, we'd rather work this out now to make that not be a conflict. So 3,500 is another one that we use for things are told in Y. And again, it's just due to the traffic pattern being at 3,000. And just assures that we have separation. I already talked about the frequencies, so I'm not going to say that again. Just a quick recap. As soon as you establish two-way comms with us, hey you, this is me, this is where I am, this is where I want to go, or hey you, this is me. As soon as we say your call sign, you can enter the Charlie unless we specifically say remain outside the class Charlie. You do not have to ask, confirm we're cleared to the class Charlie. The same with the surface area. If you're talking to approach and you're like, well, I'm at 1,500 feet and I'm going up the shoreline, I need to talk to tower or I need to go around. No. Just keep flying along, doing what you're supposed to do. And it's our job to say, ask you those questions. Are you going along the shoreline? Okay, we'll call tower, say, hey, see this guy 5 miles or 6 or 7 miles south? He's going to be a west shoreline transition. Good to go. And that's it. So the biggest thing is communicating that information to us. Class B airspace, I don't know how many of you fly through Seattle. You definitely have to get permission to fly through Class B. Don't just, well, Whidbey said, nope. We're talking about Class C airspace, not Class B. Throwing the disclaimer out there, you still have to get ATC clearance to operate in Class B airspace. So that's all that. Yeah, I already went over all that. Something I get asked about is ADS-B. We do not have ADS-B capabilities at Whidbey. So if you're trying to do an ADS-B check and you're like, hey, just want to check, no. It's not going to be us. You're going to have to contact, I don't even think Bellingham has it. So it'll probably be Seattle. Yeah. For ADS-B.
Because you don't have the capability of, manpower to handle that kind of thing?
No, it's the system software install that we need to actually have the capability to get that. We did have it at Key West International, excuse me, but it's based on, everything's based on funding. So it's not like every military base is going to get the same exact upgrade. It just so happens I was in Key West when I got ADSB, and even when I saw that, the only difference is we see a little dot next to the call sign. So normally it just says call sign, type, speed, altitude. Next to the call sign will either be a closed dot saying they have ADSB in and out, or an open dot saying it's ADSB out. That's all we get. So we don't even get that here. So we don't see if you have ADSB or not. Again, if you hear, say, November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we approach standby, you can still enter the class Charlie airspace. You don't have to deviate or anything like that. VFR reporting points, everybody's familiar with that. So we got Bush Point, which is just outside or just inside of airspace, so that's a good one when you're coming from the south. Cattle Point if you're coming from San Juan's, as well as Chuckanut Bay is the other one. That's a good reference to our airspace, because you're not going to obviously have that. And that's it. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Are the P-8s the only Navy aircraft out there with ADSB out?
That I've seen, yes. So I don't think the F-18s are going to get it. I don't even think they really need it, but yeah.
I've seen the F-18 showing up on ADSB.
It depends if they have it on or not. P-8s are notorious for having it on because they want more situational awareness than F-18s, because F-18s have an actual radar in their jet. So they're going to see aircraft, and then ADSB really doesn't give them any type of operational advantage, versus the P-8s. They're going to have more situational awareness with that on.
So I recently saw the SAR helicopter practicing over Lake Campbell,
yeah.
on ADSB, and I was wondering, that seems like the one that would benefit the most around here with it.
You would think so. But again, everything's based on, yeah.
Remember, they're older than ADSB, and they're not going to get upgraded. So if you bust a Charlie, say you're coming from Lopez and it's 1300, and maybe you go right up to 1300 and you're all freaked out about it, should you call in and say, I'm sorry I busted, I'll stay below, or should just remain silent?
I mean, if
Say 100 feet below.
yeah, if you're at 1,300 feet in a 1,300 foot airspace, I mean, you're already kind
Right
of,
on the line.
yeah. Usually, if you're monitoring our frequency and you hear us reaching out to you, it's more of a factor, not saying you're in the right by not doing that, but you're more of a factor than if all of a sudden that happens and you just, hit some turbulence, you bump up to 1,400, you come back down. We're looking at the scope like, this guy, versus you're doing that and you're skirting around, the bottom, and we have an aircraft on approach, and that happens because now this aircraft's at 1,300 feet. 1,800 feet. You're at 1,300 feet, and we need how many feet? 500 feet, and you bump up to 1,400. Now technically we just lost separation. So that's why it's kind of one of those things where if you're saying 100 feet below that at 1,200 is better than being right at that level. And that's when you'll hear aircraft 5 miles east of the air station, 1,300. Contact me on 118.2, or they'll reach out on guard if it's really that big of a deal. Or you can just call and be like, hey, I want to transition. So, yeah.
How often does that happen where somebody busts?
I'd probably say it doesn't happen as often, honestly, as it used to because of technology and aircraft now. It used to be really bad to the east before ADSB was a thing, and aircraft have, iPads and these upgraded GPS and glass cockpits and stuff.
Not the ADSB out.
Yeah.
GPS, you got the little picture there.
Yep. Versus, I'm used to flying. Okay, it's right there. Right, this is, and then do it the old-fashioned way. So.
Is it like a daily thing, or is it like once in a month kind of thing?
It depends. Just depends. Honestly, I've seen it where we had, 3 violators in a day, and it'll go months and nothing. So
if you're flying around from De Laurentiis round the edge of the primary area to Anacortes, and on occasions I would see F-18 traffic on ADSB coming in and listening to the VHF part of the conversation where the F-18 was being given my position.
Yep.
but I wasn't talking to you guys. Would you prefer that I'd pop up and say that I have eyes on the F-18 or not?
No, because that doesn't buy us anything because you're not talking to us.
That's why I didn't do
So,
it. I
yeah.
just thought, this is interesting. I can
The initial reaction is like,
see me and he's kind of going around the outside of me.
the initial reaction you think would be like, oh yeah, I have him in sight, I'll just keep approach. But you're not radar identified, so we can't take your word for gossip. And it's like, or you can just call up tower and be like, hey, I want to transition from Oak Harbor to Anacortes. Like, you see the trend? Like, I want you guys to call more.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, if the reason I stopped doing it was because on a number of occasions I'd get aircraft calling or call my call sign and say remain clear of Class C, and it's like, why did I waste my time?
Look, bug them. I'm telling you right now, because I used to be the radar branch chief, and I preach to them. I'm like, we're here to provide a service. I'll get more onto that once it stops recording. But is there any other questions?
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.